I always believed that secrets in this family were impossible to keep. My grandmother, Eleanor, was the pillar of truth for all of us. At least, that's what I believed. Until the afternoon I pulled up the loose floorboard in her sewing room. I wasn't searching for treasure. I was checking for mold. Instead, I found a heavy, leather-bound album wrapped in purple silk. It smelled like old perfume, and something darker, fear. When I opened it, the world I knew quietly collapsed. The faces staring back at me were not my family. The man holding her hand wasn't my grandfather. And then I saw the baby. For 50 years, my grandmother carried a secret capable of erasing everything we thought we knew about ourselves. I stood there, shaking in the dust, realizing that the woman I loved most was someone I had never truly known. But to understand why she buried this truth, I need to go back. Before I go back to that dusty room and the secret that changed my life, tell me, where are you listening from? What city or country? I'd love to know who is sharing this journey with me today. The silence in the house was heavier than the grief itself. You know that specific kind of silence that follows a funeral? It is a thick, suffocating blanket that settles over everything after the last guest has eaten the last stale sandwich and muttered the last awkward apology. The house on Elm Street, a Victorian beauty that had stood for 100 years, felt like it was holding its breath. For 35 years, this house had been my sanctuary. My parents' home was filled with expectations, demands, and the cold pressure to succeed. But Grandma Eleanor's house was different. It was filled with the smell of lavender wax, baking bread, and unconditional acceptance. I sat on the bottom step of the grand staircase, loosening the black tie that felt like a noose around my neck. Upstairs, I could hear my mother, Joyce, pacing back and forth in the master bedroom. My mother was a practical woman. She grieved by organizing. She was already talking about estate agents, auctions, and clearing out the clutter. To her, Eleanor's lifetime of collections, the porcelain figurines, the stacks of National Geographic magazines, the endless jars of buttons, were just obstacles to a quick sale. To me, they were the map of a soul. I needed to get away from the noise of my mother's efficiency. I stood up, the old wood of the staircase groaning under my weight, a sound I had known since I was a toddler. I walked past the living room, where the floral armchair still held the imprint of Grandma's body. I could almost see her there, knitting with that rhythmic, hypnotic click-clack of needles that used to lull me to sleep on rainy afternoons. Eleanor was a woman of grace. She was the matriarch of the community, the woman who organized the church bake sales, who volunteered at the library, who always had a kind word for the postman. She was perfect. That was the word everyone used at the funeral. Perfect. Eleanor was a perfect mother, they said. A perfect wife to the late Judge Tipton. Her perfect grandmother. But as I stood in the hallway looking at her portrait on the wall, I remembered the cracks, the moments that didn't fit the perfection. I remembered the times, usually in late November, when a strange melancholy would overtake her. It wasn't just sadness, it was a haunting. I would find her sitting in the sewing room, staring out the window at the empty street, her hand pressed against the glass, as if she were waiting for someone who never came. When I would ask her what was wrong, she would snap out of it, flash that bright, rehearsed smile and say, "Oh, nothing, Lucas. Just thinking about how fast time flies." There was one memory that kept playing in my mind, a loop I couldn't stop. I was about 12 years old. I had come into the kitchen unexpectedly and found her burning a letter in the sink. The flames were licking at the paper, turning the blue ink into ash. She looked terrified when she saw me. She didn't scold me. She just turned on the tap, drowning the ashes instantly. She grabbed my shoulders, her grip surprisingly strong, and whispered, "Some things are better left to the fire, Lucas. Never forget that. The past can burn you if you hold on to it too tight." I never asked about the letter. I never asked about the tears I saw in her eyes that day. I just accepted that Grandma had secrets, like everyone else. I didn't know that her secrets were building a wall around our entire family history. I walked down the hallway toward the back of the house. My destination was the sewing room. It was the one place my mother hadn't invaded yet with her cardboard boxes and packing tape. It was a small room, formerly a sun porch, filled with natural light and the scent of old fabric and cedar. This was Eleanor's true domain. It was where she created the beautiful quilts that won prizes at the county fair, and where she hemmed my trousers when I grew too tall too fast. I pushed the door open. The air inside was still, suspended in time. Her sewing machine, an old black Singer with gold detailing, sat uncovered on the table. A half-finished quilt was draped over the chair. It felt like she had just stepped out for a cup of tea and would be back any minute. I walked over to the window, the same window she used to stare out of every November. The view was just the backyard, the old oak tree, and the overgrown rose bushes that the gardener, Mr. Arthur, used to tend to with such devotion. Mr. Arthur. I hadn't seen him at the funeral. That was odd. Arthur had been a fixture in our lives for as long as I could remember. He was more than a handyman. He was a constant presence, a quiet, stoic man who fixed the roof, mowed the lawn, and occasionally sat on the back porch drinking lemonade with Grandma. They would talk for hours in low voices. My mother hated him. She called him the help and always complained that Grandma was too familiar with him. "It's improper, Mother," she would say. Grandma would just smile and pour Arthur another glass. I sighed, running my hand along the edge of the sewing table. I missed her so much it physically hurt, a sharp ache in the center of my chest. I wanted one more conversation, one more piece of advice. I wanted to ask her about the letter in the sink. I wanted to know who she was waiting for at the window. But the dead don't speak, or so I thought. That's when something felt wrong. It wasn't a spiritual feeling. It was physical. As I moved around the small room, trying to feel close to her, my foot caught on the rug. It was a beautiful hand-woven Persian rug that had been in this room for decades. I stumbled slightly, and the heavy heel of my dress shoe scraped against the floor. The rug bunched up, revealing the hardwood underneath. I bent down to straighten it. I was obsessive about keeping her things neat, a final act of service. As I pulled the rug back into place, I noticed the floorboards. The house was old, built in the 1920s, and the wood was dark oak, worn smooth by generations of feet. But one board, right near the corner where the heavy oak cabinet stood, looked different. The gap between it and the next board was slightly wider, and the dust didn't settle there in the same way. It looked cleaner, as if it had been moved recently. Curiosity is a strange thing. In the middle of grief, it gave me a task, a distraction. I knelt, ignoring the creak of my knees and the risk of ruining my suit trousers. I ran my finger along the edge of the board. It was loose, very loose. I looked at the heavy cabinet next to it. It was filled with bolts of fabric, silks, wools, cottons. It must have weighed 200 pounds. But looking closely at the floor, I saw faint scratch marks in the varnish, as if the cabinet had been walked forward and backward repeatedly over the years. This wasn't just a loose board due to age. This was a mechanism. "Lucas, are you up there?" My mother's voice drifted up from the hallway, sharp and impatient. "The lawyer is calling in 20 minutes. I need you to find the deed to the summer cottage." "I'm looking, Mom," I lied. My heart was starting to beat faster. I didn't know why. It was just a floorboard. But the atmosphere in the room had shifted. The air felt charged, electric. I gripped the edge of the loose board with my fingertips and pulled. It gave way with a groan of dry wood, lifting up to reveal a dark, hollow space between the joists. I leaned in, squinting into the darkness. A smell wafted up, musty, ancient, but laced with that familiar lavender scent. There was something down there. It wasn't a jewelry box or a safe. It was a bundle. I reached down, my hand trembling slightly. I brushed against something soft. I grabbed it and pulled it into the light. It was a large, rectangular object wrapped in layers of purple silk. The silk was old. It was fraying at the edges. The color faded from a deep, royal purple to a dusty lilac. It was tied with a thick velvet ribbon. I sat back on my heels, the bundle resting on my lap. It felt heavy, substantial. If you enjoy stories about secrets that change everything, you're in the right place. This channel exists to tell the stories that usually remain hidden in the shadows. I untied the ribbon. It came undone with a whisper of friction. I unfolded the silk, layer by layer, feeling like I was undressing a ghost. Inside was a photo album. But it wasn't one of the family albums I knew. Those were all standardized blue leather with the triumphs embossed in gold on the spine. This one was different. It was bound in cracked brown leather, looking worn and traveled. There was no title on the spine, just a date scratched into the leather with what looked like a knife tip, 1968. I did the math quickly. My mother was born in 1960, my Uncle Robert in 1964. By 1968, Grandma Eleanor was a respected judge's wife, raising 2 children in this very house. It was a settled time, a boring time, historically, for our family. I opened the cover. The first page was separated by a sheet of spiderweb-thin tissue paper. I turned it. The photograph was black and white, square with white borders. It showed a young woman sitting on a rock by a river. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her hair loose and wild, not in the tight chignon Grandma always wore. She was wearing a simple sundress, her feet bare. It was undeniably Eleanor, but an Eleanor I had never met. She looked free, and she wasn't alone. Sitting next to her, looking at her with an expression of absolute devastating adoration, was a man. He was young, rugged, with messy hair, and a jawline that looked cut from granite. He wore a dirty mechanic's shirt. His hand was resting possessively, tenderly, on her knee. I stared at the man. It wasn't Grandpa. My grandfather, the judge, was a man of suits and ties, a man of rigid posture and cool detachment. This man in the photo was fire and earth. He was raw. I turned the page. More photos. They were everywhere, on a beach, in a small, messy kitchen, dancing in a field. They looked deeply, passionately in love. It was the kind of love you see in movies, the kind that consumes you. Who was he? Was this an affair? Was my perfect grandmother leading a double life in 1968? I felt a wave of nausea. If my mother saw this, it would destroy her image of Eleanor. It would taint the legacy she was so desperate to preserve. I should close it. I should put it back. But I couldn't. I turned another page, and then I found something I wasn't supposed to see. The photo occupied the entire page. It was an 8x10 portrait, slightly blurry, as if taken in a hurry. It was Eleanor sitting in a hospital bed. She looked exhausted, her face pale and sweaty, but her eyes were shining with a fierce, terrifying joy. In her arms, she held a newborn baby. I froze. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. My mother was born in 1960, Uncle Robert in 1964. This album was marked 1968. There was no third child. There was no record, no whisper, no rumor of another pregnancy. I looked closer at the baby. It was wrapped in a simple white blanket. I carefully pulled the photo out of the plastic sleeve to check the back. Grandma had a habit of documenting everything. Her handwriting, usually elegant and sweeping, was shaky here. My little Leo, born April 4th, 1968. You are my secret. You are my heart. Leo. I had an uncle named Leo. An uncle who didn't exist, an uncle who was erased. My mind raced. Where was he? Did he die? Was he given up for adoption? But why? 1968. Grandma was married to Grandpa then. If this was the other man's child, the mechanic's child, I flipped through the rest of the pages frantically. The tone of the photos changed. The joy vanished. The later photos showed Eleanor looking gaunt, crying. There were pictures of the baby alone, then pictures of the baby being held by the mechanic, and then the photos stopped. The last few pages were filled with letters, envelopes that had been opened and resealed 1,000 times. I pulled one out. It was addressed to Eleanor Tipton, but the return address was a P.O. box in a town called Shadow Creek, 3 hours north of here. I started to read. "El, I can't do this without you. He needs his mother. The money you send isn't enough to fill the hole you left. You chose your reputation over us. You chose the judge over your own flesh and blood. I will keep your secret, because I love you. God help me, I still love you." But Leo asks about the lady in the picture. What do I tell him? That she's dead, because to us you might as well be. The signature at the bottom was T. Thomas, the mechanic. My hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. She hadn't just had an affair. She had a whole other family. A family she abandoned to maintain her status as the judge's wife. The perfect Eleanor was a lie. She had bought her perfection with abandonment money. "Lucas!" My mother's voice was closer now. She was coming up the stairs. Panic surged through me. I couldn't let her see this. Not now. She was already on the edge. This would push her over. She would burn this album just like Grandma burned that letter in the sink. She would sanitize history to protect the name. I scrambled to shove the letters back into the album. I closed the heavy leather cover and looked for a hiding place. The floorboard was too loud to pry open again quickly. "Lucas, are you deaf?" The doorknob turned. I shoved the album under the pile of quilts on the chair just as the door swung open. My mother stood there, looking impeccable in her black dress, not a hair out of place, but her eyes were cold. She scanned the room, her gaze lingering on the messy rug and the open cabinet. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice suspicious. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just memories, Mom," I stammered, trying to steady my breathing. "I was looking for some thread you wanted." She narrowed her eyes. She walked into the room, her heels clicking on the hardwood. She stopped right next to the chair where the album was hidden. She reached out to touch the quilt. "We don't need thread, Lucas. We need to clear this room. The auction house is coming tomorrow to appraise the sewing machine and the furniture." "Tomorrow?" I choked out. "Mom, we just buried her 3 hours ago." "Life is for the living, Lucas," she said crisply, "and business is business. By the way, there is someone at the back door asking for you. It's that man, Arthur." My stomach dropped. Arthur, the gardener, the man Grandma drank lemonade with. "Arthur?" I asked. "Yes," she sneered. "He looks dreadful, drunk probably. He's demanding to come in. Says he needs to check the infrastructure of the house. I told him to leave, but he won't go until he speaks to the man of the house, since the judge is gone. Go deal with him. And then come help me with the silver." She turned and left, leaving the door open. I waited until her footsteps faded down the hall. I grabbed the album from under the quilt and tucked it under my jacket, holding it tight against my ribs. I could feel the heat of it through my shirt. I ran down the back stairs to the kitchen door. I opened it and stepped out into the cool evening air. Arthur was standing by the rose bushes. He was wearing his usual stained work clothes, holding an old cap in his hands. He was an old man now, probably in his early 70s, with weathered skin and knuckles swollen from arthritis. But as I walked closer, I saw his face. He wasn't drunk. He was weeping. Silent, shaking tears running down his cheeks. He looked up at me, and for the first time I really looked at him. I looked at his jawline. I looked at the way his hair, though grey now, fell in a messy wave over his forehead. And then I thought of the photo in the album, the mechanic, Thomas. The resemblance was there, buried under 50 years of age and sun damage, but it was there. Arthur took a step toward me. His voice was a rasp, broken and desperate. "Lucas," he said, "did you find it?" I froze. "Find what, Arthur?" He pointed a trembling finger toward the second-floor window, the sewing room window. "The book," he whispered, "the purple book. Tell me you found it before she did." He didn't mean my mother, he meant Eleanor. But Eleanor was dead. "Why, Arthur?" I asked, clutching the album tighter under my jacket. "What is in that book that you know about?" He looked me dead in the eye, and the grief in his face transformed into something else. Fear. "Not what is in it," Arthur said. "Who is in it? And Lucas, you need to give it to me now, before it kills us all." That's when the truth started to surface. I stepped back, clutching the album so hard my knuckles turned white. The wind was picking up, rustling the dry leaves of the oak tree, creating a sound like 1,000 whispering voices. "Kills us all," I repeated, my voice barely audible over the wind. "Arthur, you're the gardener. You've been cutting these roses since I was in diapers. What are you talking about?" Arthur took a deep, shuddering breath. He reached into the pocket of his dirty work shirt and pulled out a rag to wipe his eyes. The gesture was so familiar, I had seen him do it 100 times after a long day in the sun. But now I saw the hand itself. On the inside of his left wrist, faded to a dull blue but still legible, was a small tattoo, a compass. I remembered the photo in the album. The man in the mechanic's shirt had the same tattoo. It was clearer in the photo, fresh ink on young skin, but the design was unmistakable. "You're him," I said. It wasn't a question. "You're Thomas." Arthur Thomas looked at his wrist, then back at me. "I haven't heard that name spoken aloud in 45 years, he said softly. She was the only one who said it right. Everyone else just barked orders at the help. "You were her lover," I accused, stepping closer. You are Leo's father." He flinched as if I had struck him. "I am his father," he corrected, his voice gaining a sudden fierce strength. "Not was. I am his father." "So, he's alive?" I asked, the hope and terror warring in my chest. "Where is he? Did he get adopted? Did he move away?" Arthur laughed, but it was a dry, bitter sound. "Adopted? Moved away? Lucas, you think your grandfather, the Honorable Judge Tipton, would allow his wife's bastard child to simply move away, where he could come back later and ruin his reputation?" "No." He stepped closer, invading my personal space. I could smell the soil on him and the faint scent of old tobacco. "The judge gave Eleanor a choice in 1968, Arthur said, his eyes drilling into mine. "We were young. We were stupid. We thought love was enough. We tried to run away. We made it to Shadow Creek. We had Leo. For 3 months, we were a family. We were happy, Lucas, happier than anyone in this big cold house has ever been." He paused, looking up at the dark window of the sewing room. "But the judge found us. He didn't come with police. He came with lawyers and doctors. He told Eleanor that if she didn't come back, he would have me arrested for kidnapping. He would have me thrown in prison for life. And Leo—" Arthur's voice cracked. "He said he would ensure Leo ended up in the state system, in one of those places where children are forgotten and abused. He guaranteed it." I felt sick. My grandfather, the man who taught me how to fish, the man whose portrait hung in the courthouse, was a monster. "So she came back," I whispered. "To save us," Arthur nodded. "She sacrificed her happiness to save me from prison, and to save Leo from the system, or so she thought. She agreed to return, to play the role of the perfect wife, to never speak my name again. In exchange, the judge promised Leo would be placed with a good family far away." "And you?" I asked. "Why are you here? Why stay as the gardener for the man who destroyed your life?" Arthur looked down at his hands. "Because I couldn't leave her alone with him. I knew what he was. So I made a deal with the devil. I came back a year later begging for work. The judge loved it. He loved the power trip of having his wife's lover scrubbing his floors and cutting his grass. It was his ultimate victory. He let me stay to humiliate her. Every day she looked out that window and saw me on my knees in the dirt. It was a reminder of her sin." "But why didn't you leave?" I pressed. "Why endure that?" "Because of the promise," Arthur said. She promised me that if I stayed, if I waited, one day she would find a way to tell the truth. She was gathering proof. She was writing it all down. That album, it's not just photos, Lucas. It's the evidence. Evidence of what? Of where Leo really is, Arthur said. The judge lied. He never sent Leo to a good family. He didn't want risking the boy growing up and asking questions. My blood ran cold. What did he do? Arthur grabbed my shoulders. He hid him. He hid him where no one looks. He hid him in plain sight. What do you mean? Lucas, think. Who lives in the guest house? The one at the far edge of the property behind the hedges. The one your mother always told you was unsafe and full of old storage. The old carriage house, I asked. It's boarded up. Mom said it was full of asbestos. It's not boarded up, Arthur said grimly. And it's not storage. That's where Leo is. That's where he has been for 50 years. I staggered back. The carriage house. I'd played near it as a child. I'd heard noises there once, a thump, a hum, and my mother had yanked me away screaming that it was rats, that I was never to go near it. He kept him there, I gasped. Like a prisoner? Like a ghost, Arthur corrected. The judge hired a nurse, private care, paid off the books. Leo has difficulties. He was born different, fragile. The judge used that. He convinced Eleanor that Leo was too sick to live in the world, that he needed to be protected here. But really, he was just hiding his shame. I looked toward the dark outline of the trees where the carriage house stood. My uncle, my flesh and blood. He wasn't a memory, he wasn't a story. He was 200 yards away, living in a boarded-up shack while we ate Christmas dinner in the main house. Does Mom know? I asked. Joyce? Arthur shook his head. She suspects something shameful, but she doesn't know it's a brother. She thinks it's just one of the judge's eccentricities. But now that the judge is dead, and Eleanor is dead, Joyce wants to sell the property. She wants to bulldoze the carriage house next week. She's going to kill him, I realized. Not on purpose, but she'll send a demolition crew. Exactly, Arthur said. That's why I need the album. It has his birth certificate. It has the medical records Eleanor stole from the judge's safe. It proves he is a Tipton. It proves he has a right to be here. Without that book, he is just a squatter, a nobody, and they will make him disappear. I looked at the album in my hands. It wasn't just memories anymore. It was a life. It was a weapon. Take me to him, I said. Lucas, you're not ready, Arthur warned. Take me to him. But the worst part came later. We walked in silence through the dark garden. The air had grown cold, a biting chill that seeped into my bones. The path to the carriage house was overgrown. Thorns snagged at my suit trousers, tearing the expensive fabric. I didn't care. I felt like I was walking through a nightmare I had been living in my whole life without knowing it. As we got closer, the smell hit me. It wasn't a bad smell exactly. It was the smell of stagnation, damp wood, wet leaves, and isolation. The carriage house loomed out of the darkness, a small stone structure that looked like a tomb. The windows were indeed boarded up from the outside, painted black to blend into the shadows. Arthur stopped at the heavy wooden door. He didn't use a key. He reached up and moved a loose stone in the wall, pulling out a hidden latch mechanism. The judge had built a prison, but Arthur had found a way in. He doesn't know about me, Arthur whispered, his hand on the door handle. He knows me as the man. I bring him food when the nurse is asleep. I sit with him in the dark, but I never told him I was his father. I couldn't risk him saying it to the nurse. It would have ended everything. The weight of that confession hit me like a physical blow. To be a father, standing inches from your son for 50 years, feeding him, caring for him, but never being able to say, I am your dad. The torture of it was unimaginable. Some stories stay silent for years, hidden behind closed doors. If you've ever felt the weight of a family secret, or if you believe the truth always deserves to come out, you're not alone. We are walking this path together. Arthur pushed the door open. There was a dim light inside. A single lamp with an orange shade cast a warm, suffocating glow over the room. It was surprisingly clean, but sparse. A single bed. A shelf with a few worn wooden toys that looked like they belonged to a toddler, not a 50-year-old man. There was a radio playing classical music very softly, and there, sitting in a rocking chair facing the wall, was a figure. He was small, hunched over. His hair was grey and thinning, much like Arthur's. He was wearing soft grey sweatpants and a knitted sweater, one of the sweaters I recognized. Grandma had knitted it. I had seen her working on it last Christmas. She told me it was for charity. "Leo," Arthur said softly. The figure stopped rocking. He turned slowly. The face that looked back at me broke my heart into a million jagged pieces. He had Eleanor's eyes, big, blue, innocent eyes trapped in an aged face. But there was a vacancy there, a disconnect. He looked at Arthur and smiled, a pure, childlike smile. "The man," Leo said. His voice was high, unused. "You brought the book?" He wasn't asking for the photo album. He was holding a tattered copy of Peter Rabbit. "Not that book, Leo," Arthur said, his voice choking. "I brought a friend." Leo looked at me. He tilted his head. He didn't see a nephew. He didn't see a stranger. He saw a threat. He shrank back into the chair, pulling his knees up to his chest. "No," Leo whimpered. "Judge said no visitors. Judge said bad things happen with visitors." "The judge is gone, Leo," I said, stepping forward. My voice trembled. "He can't hurt you anymore." Leo started to rock faster. "Judge is never gone. Judge sees all. Judge says be quiet." I looked around the room. The walls were covered in drawings, crayon drawings on the back of old legal pads. I stepped closer to inspect them. They were all the same. A big black figure looming over a small stick figure, a woman crying in a window, a man in the garden with a shovel. Leo had been documenting his life too, in the only way he knew how. I turned to Arthur. "Does he know who Eleanor was?" "He calls her the Angel," Arthur said, tears streaming freely now. "She used to sneak in here on Sunday mornings while the rest of us were at church. That's why she never came to service. She told everyone she had migraines. She was here, reading to him, holding him." I fell to my knees. The guilt was overwhelming. All those Sunday mornings I sat in the pew, annoyed that Grandma wasn't there to give me mints, thinking she was resting in luxury. She was here, in this dungeon, trying to be a mother to the son she failed. I had lived in a university dorm, paid for by the judge's money. I drove a car bought with the judge's money. Every comfort I had ever known was built on the back of this imprisonment. My inheritance was stolen from this man. "I'm so sorry," I sobbed, my head in my hands. "I'm so sorry." Leo stopped rocking. He stood up. He moved with a stiff, shuffling gait. He came over to me. I expected him to hit me or scream. Instead, he reached out a hand that looked exactly like mine, and patted my head. "Sad man," Leo said. "Angel cries too. Don't cry. The man brings cookies." It was too much. The innocence in the face of such cruelty. I looked at Arthur. "We have to get him out of here," I said, wiping my face. "Tonight, before my mother sends the appraisers tomorrow. If they find him without the proof," Arthur said, "they will call the authorities. They will say he is a trespasser. Or worse, they will send him to a state asylum. He won't survive a week in a place like that. He needs family." "He has family," I said firmly. I stood up. "He has us." But as I said it, a blinding light flooded the room. We all froze. Car headlights, high beams, cutting through the darkness outside, shining directly through the open door of the carriage house. Then the slamming of a car door, and the sharp, distinct click of heels on stone. "Lucas!" It was my mother. And she wasn't alone. I heard the deeper, aggressive voice of the family lawyer, Mr. Henderson. "I saw the light, Joyce. Someone is in the shack." Arthur looked at me, panic wild in his eyes. "Hide the album," he hissed. "If Henderson gets it, it's over. He was the judge's fixer. He knows everything." I shoved the album under Leo's mattress just as the shadow fell across the doorway. My mother stepped in. She was wearing a trench coat over her funeral dress. Her face was a mask of confusion that quickly hardened into rage as she saw Arthur, then me, and finally, Leo. She stared at Leo. Leo stared at her. And for the first time, I saw recognition in my mother's eyes, not of a brother, but of a memory she had repressed. "You," she whispered, pointing a shaking finger at Leo. "I remember you. You're the monster from the attic." Leo whimpered. "Sister," he said clearly. My mother screamed. Then came the moment I will never forget. My mother's scream wasn't one of fear. It was a scream of shattered reality. She pressed her back against the door frame, her hands clutching her throat. "The monster," she sobbed, looking at Leo. "Daddy told me. He told me there was a monster in the garden that would eat me if I was bad. He told me never to look." Mr. Henderson, the lawyer, stepped in front of her. His face was a mask of cold, calculated control. He didn't look surprised. He looked annoyed. "Joyce, go back to the car," Henderson barked. He turned his shark-like gaze on me, then on Arthur. "You trespassing fools! You have 5 minutes to vacate this property before I call the sheriff. And you," he pointed at Leo, "you're going to the county ward tonight." "He isn't going anywhere," Arthur said, stepping between the lawyer and his son. For an old gardener, he looked like a warrior. "This is his home. It's the Tipton estate," Henderson spat. "And as the executor of the judge's will, I am ordering the demolition of this structure immediately. There is no record of this person." "There is now," I said. I turned and reached under the mattress. I pulled out the purple leather album. Henderson's eyes widened. He recognized it. He lunged forward, surprisingly fast for a man in a suit. "Give me that!" I sidestepped him. My heart was pounding like a drum, but my mind was crystal clear. I wasn't just Lucas the grandson anymore. I was the witness. "Why are you so afraid of a picture book, Henderson?" I asked, holding it high. "It's private property," he shouted. "It belongs to the estate." "No," I said, opening the back cover. I had felt something stiff inside the lining earlier, something I hadn't had time to check until now. My fingers found the slit in the leather. I pulled out a thick folded document sealed with red wax. "It belongs to the heir." I broke the seal. My mother stopped crying. She was watching me, mesmerized. "Lucas, what is that?" she whispered. I unfolded the paper. It wasn't just a letter. It was a last will and testament. But it wasn't the judge's. It was Eleanor's, and it was dated 3 days before she died. I started to read aloud, my voice echoing in the small, damp room. "I, Eleanor Tipton, being of sound mind, hereby revoke all previous wills. The Tipton fortune, which my husband controlled, but which came entirely from my father's inheritance, is mine to give, and I give it all. The house, the land, the investments, to my firstborn son, Leo Thomas Tipton." The silence that followed was deafening. "That's a lie," Henderson hissed, though he was sweating now. "She was incompetent. The judge had power of attorney." "The judge is dead," I countered, reading further. "I appoint Arthur Miller, my faithful partner, and Leo's father, as the trustee and guardian, and I leave my granddaughter, Joyce, my forgiveness, and a request that she finally opens her eyes." I looked at my mother. She was trembling. The narrative she had lived by, the wealthy judge, the perfect family, the dangerous monster in the garden, was dissolving. The monster was her brother. The wealth belonged to him. And the perfect father she worshipped was the villain who had imprisoned them all. Joyce looked at Leo, really looked at him. Leo was holding his Peter Rabbit book, looking terrified of the shouting. He has her eyes," Mom whispered. She walked past Henderson, ignoring his warnings. She walked up to Leo. She didn't hug him, she wasn't ready for that. But she reached out and touched the sleeve of his sweater. "You're not a monster," she said, her voice breaking. "You're just Leo." Leo looked at her hand, then up at her face. "Sister sad?" he asked. "Sister wants cookie?" My mother broke. She fell to her knees on the dirty floor of the shack and wailed, a guttural, ugly, necessary sound of mourning for 50 years of lies. Henderson tried one last time. "This won't stand in court. I'll fight it. I'll bury you in legal fees." I stepped up to him. I am not a violent man, but in that moment I had the strength of 3 generations of secrets behind me. "Get out," I said quietly. "If you ever set foot on this property again, I will give this album to the press. I will show them the photos of the judge. I will show them the letters. I will destroy his legacy so thoroughly that they'll take his portrait down from the courthouse wall." Henderson looked at the album. He looked at Arthur's defiant face. He looked at the ruin of his client, Joyce. He straightened his tie, sneered, and turned around. We heard his car engine roar to life and fade away into the night. We were alone. The wind howled outside, but inside, the air was finally clear. But this story didn't end there. The next morning, the sun rose over the Tipton estate, but everything looked different. We didn't move Leo into the main house immediately. It was too overwhelming for him. But we opened the doors. For the first time in 50 years, Arthur walked through the front door of the big house, not as a servant, but as the master of the house. I watched from the kitchen as Arthur led Leo into the living room. Leo stopped at the piano. He touched the keys, pressing a single high C. He smiled. "My mother is still processing. It's hard to undo a lifetime of brainwashing. She doesn't live here anymore. She moved to a condo in the city. She said the house has too many ghosts, but she visits. Every Sunday, she sits with Leo and reads Peter Rabbit to him. Last week, I saw her hold his hand. It's a start. As for me, I didn't sell the house. I moved in. I fired the expensive landscaping crew. Now on weekends you can find me and Arthur in the garden. He's teaching me how to tend the roses. He's teaching me that things only grow if you give them light. I often think about Grandma Eleanor. People still say she was a saint. I don't think she was a saint. I think she was a woman trapped in a cage of her own making, trying to protect the things she loved, the only way she knew how, by hiding them. She left us a mess. She left us pain. But she also left us the truth, and in the end, the truth is the only inheritance that matters. I was cleaning out the sewing room yesterday, getting it ready to be Leo's new bedroom, the one with the best view of the garden, when I found one last photo tucked into the very back of the album. It was taken recently. It must have been just weeks before she died. It's a selfie, blurry and poorly framed. It shows Eleanor and Arthur, their heads pressed together, grey hair touching. They are smiling like teenagers. On the back, she had written just 3 words. "Love wins, eventually." Stories like this exist because someone lived them, and someone listened. If you believe that no family secret should stay buried forever, and that every voice deserves to be heard, you are always welcome here. I'm Lucas, and this is our new beginning.